Welcome to this episode of Season 5 of The Common Bridge, where policy and current events are discussed in a fiercely nonpartisan manner. The host, Richard Helppie, is a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and political analyst who has reached over 4 million listeners, viewers, and readers around the world. With our surging growth in audience and subscriptions, The Common Bridge continues to expand its reach. The show is available on the Substack website and the Substack app. Simply search for The Common Bridge. You can also find us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. The Common Bridge draws guests and audiences from across the political spectrum, and we invite you to become a free or paid subscriber on your favorite medium.
Hello, welcome to The Common Bridge. I'm your host, Rich Helppie. Today we've got Brian Hess. We're going to be talking about sports washing. Now this is not the sports washing like you need to shower up after the game, but it's got a lot of economics that are wrapped into it and quite a bit of history as well. It's about using an athletic event on behalf of perhaps unsavory governments or characters, originating in 1936 Germany, where Adolf Hitler wanted to use the Olympics to showcase what they've been doing. Today now we have the Saudi Arabian government investing in live golf and in martial arts and maybe looking at some other things. And sports is a huge business. The NFL alone over $16 billion. And when we finally tote up what's coming out of NCAA football, I think we're going to be surprised. And the soccer leagues around the world are worth billions as well. So joining us as our guest to talk about this, Brian Hess. Brian, welcome to The Common Bridge. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Rich. That was a great history of sports washing, and it really does show that we're almost at a century of authoritarian regimes using sports to influence global politics. And I'm really excited to kind of show how this is really starting to impact American sports fans today.
Sounds good. Well, Brian, our audience of our listeners, our readers, our viewers, they like to know a little bit about the background. So where were your early days spent, and maybe what kind of education or jobs, experience that you have that brought us to this point today?
Yeah, so I'm a lifelong Virginian. I grew up in Northern Virginia, went to Virginia Tech, which is where I really kind of fell into my sports fandom here in the DC area, and Hokie football. And I started working in Northern Virginia because I knew I wanted to influence policy. I wanted to work and protect consumers. And I found Sports Fans Coalition, which was able to combine my love of sports and my love of politics and policy, and really take on some really big challenges. Our organization was founded in 2009, and I took over in about 2017. And we've taken on Ticketmaster and their monopoly and trying to break them up. We've taken on publicly financed sports stadiums, sports blackout rules, really anything that really does impact the sports fan experience here in America. We are there making sure that the fans' voice is heard. And that's really where we kind of enter into the sports washing debate right now.
So what's the name of the organization, and how can people get more information? What's the website, or how else can they learn more?
So we're Sports Fans Coalition. Our website is sportsfans.org. And you can visit there and see all of the different things we're working on across the country, including state legislation, federal legislation, policymaking. All of that information is there on the website.
Great. And what's the funding source for your organization?
So we are funded by a number of partners who share our vision of a fan-friendly marketplace and a fan-friendly experience and want to put consumer protection at the forefront.
Who might some of those be? Who might some of your top donors be?
We're frequently donated by StubHub. That's one that we're oftentimes linked with, and we've been working with them for many years to ensure that fans have transparent marketplaces on ticket resale. They support all-in pricing. We support all-in pricing. We both support transferability of tickets so that season ticket holders can feel free to invest in their fandom and resell their tickets when they can't attend, one of the 80-some games from basketball or hockey or baseball games.
I see. Okay. Well, I'm a big sports fan myself, and season ticket holder still for my beloved Detroit Red Wings, and I like to watch the University of Michigan play. We've had a couple good years in a row, and that business is changing dramatically. But let's go into after sports washing. Most people aren't familiar with that term. What exactly is sport washing, and why is it important that people should know about this?
Yeah, so it's starting to enter the common parlance, and it really took off around the PGA Live merger and when Saudi Arabia created a competing golf league. Uh, but in general, it's when a regime, specifically one with bad human rights records or some other bad reputation they want people to ignore, use sports as a way to make them look good. They could use it to encourage tourism for people to come to their country, to try to wash over bad conversations or bad dialogue happening around what they've been doing. You know, when you talk about Saudi Arabia specifically, you can't not talk about them murdering Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist, right? They don't want you having that conversation, so they try to make themselves look good with things like Formula One racing, tennis, golf, and now MMA. You can also look at Qatar. You know, they wanted the World Cup there, and they built these huge arenas and stadiums for it. But they did so on borderline slave labor and all kinds of human rights abuses to build that. They don't want you talking about that. They want you talking about the World Cup.
Mm-hmm. I see. So, sports has been a unifying force around the world for millennia. The Olympic Games, right? The Olympic Games, have brought, people that were at war or nearly at war, that people could meet together on the playing field. And so, I'm trying to understand, why would Saudi Arabia wanting to bring tennis players in, for example, be detrimental? I mean, wouldn't that perhaps be a way to moderate some of their behavior, like killing journalists, which is, I think we can say, is a bad thing?
Yes, we could agree that killing journalists is a bad thing. We haven't seen it actually moderating that behavior, and we think there's actually a more sinister geopolitical influence game behind it that doesn't quite moderate, but tries to get others to disregard some of their infractions and some of the bad behavior that they engage in around the world. And we see that really, really closely, actually, in my home of Northern Virginia, in Alexandria, Virginia, with the arena deal that Governor Youngkin tried to get the Washington Wizards and the Capitals to move to Alexandria, Virginia, outside of D.C., and give them a $1.3 billion subsidy to do so. What was very not reported was a lot of those investors are investors in Saudi's professional fighting league. And Saudi Arabia would have directly benefited from Virginia taxpayer dollars. And that's where this is starting to get into. This isn't just about washing over their reputation, but it's actually about currying favor with our political elite.
But, well, look, sovereign wealth funds have been around for a long time. The Chinese Communist Party has one. Saudi Arabia has one. I'm presuming Qatar has one. And so they're in our banks. They're in our construction industries. They're in our shipping industries. They're making our food, owning our farms, in our pharmaceutical industry. What's different about a sovereign wealth fund wanting to invest in stadiums versus some of the other places that they're so prevalent in?
My concern from Sports Fans Coalition's perspective, and look, we've been leading the fight across the country against publicly financed sports stadiums as well. We don't believe taxpayer dollars should go to subsidize billionaires' sports arenas, sports stadiums. They're a terrible economic investment. That gets worse when really you're looking at the ownership structure of these teams or the investors involved in that, and taxpayer dollars are going offshore to support these regimes. That's where it gets really harmful to fans, because we're actually now talking about our taxpayer dollars, not just a foreign wealth front, a sovereign wealth front investing in a business. This is investing in American tax dollars that we don't get the benefit from.
I see. So, what would be a good policy response here? Are we talking disclosure? Are we talking divestment? We've got TikTok potentially being forced to change its ownership. What are some of the remedies that you're proposing, and where and how are you making those proposals?
First and foremost, I would say it starts with disclosure. Fans deserve the right to know who's behind their teams. And you actually saw what that response can look like with DC United not too long ago. They, at the home openers for the games, protested DC United's involvement with Saudi Arabia because the team went and visited the country. So fans clearly don't like this. Washington Post did a poll that showed most fans don't want foreign wealth funds investing in their teams. They want them homegrown. They want them local. So disclosures are an important first step. The TikTok ban you mentioned is a interesting policy solution that I would love to figure out how we apply that to sports specifically. I think that's one of merit, but it also starts with when you're talking about taxpayer dollars. If the government is giving a gift to a sports team for either, whether that's a stadium or an arena or for anything, the government can condition that gift on certain behavior, and they should start conditioning that gift on full divestment from sovereign wealth funds.
But, look, isn't that kind of a quaint notion that the team is going to be owned locally, and that, the average citizen would be able to listen to about this team on the radio. They'd be able to go view it on television. They'd be able to afford to take their family to a game or two every year. And this has gone on now, 40 plus years, where publicly financed stadiums are drawing the tax dollars out of hardworking everyday people, and then selling media packages that average homeowner can't afford, and forcing them to become fans. I always thought it was a bad business model because you're not going to be able to build up loyalty. But isn't this just a natural extension about where sports and lobbying have converged?
It seems that way, yeah. When you look at the media rights, the biggest frustration that fans have are, I just paid a yearly subscription to MLB's app, but yet when I want to watch the Washington Nationals here in the Northern Virginia area, I can't watch them on the app because Masson, the regional sports network, has the contract. But I don't have cable because I'm a millennial and I'm a cord cutter. So I can't watch Nationals unless I go to the game, which, I go to as many as I can, but I can't go to all of them. And so you see a lot of those frustrations, same with hockey, with basketball. You have these arcane and arbitrary in-market, out-of-market contract right distributions that end up hurting the taxpayer, because you're right. If I built your stadium, I should be able to go to that game or watch that game, especially when back in the day when sports were free over-the-air broadcast, which fortunately football still has most of their games on broadcast. But that's quickly leaving towards things like Peacock, Amazon, and the streaming world. So it does get kind of frustrating for the fan. You're taking my tax dollars and then making it harder for me to enjoy my fandom.
Indeed. Look, I grew up a long time ago, and, we could go watch a Detroit Tiger baseball game for 50 cents if we sat up in the bleachers, and, take the bus there and buy a bag of peanuts outside, and be a great afternoon. Even double headers on Sundays, scheduled double headers. I don't know where we find time to watch 6 hours of baseball, but it did happen. And now we're in an age where the pitch clock is making baseball games over in a little more than two hours. So, the underlying contest has changed. The reserve clause came in, 50 some years ago, that changed the way players were contracted. The ownerships has changed. The merging of the public interest and the private interest in the ownership has changed. And it seems to me that your objection is that, is it all sovereign wealth funds, or is it Saudi Arabia in particular that you're alarmed about?
It's all sovereign wealth funds from nations that have authoritarian regimes or bad human rights records. That includes Qatar, that includes China. Saudi Arabia right now seems to be the most prolific. They seem to have cracked the code and have been able to fly under the radar. They just spun out the PIF, the PIF, their sovereign wealth fund, spun out a sports-specific SRJ investments. And shortly thereafter, this was about last summer, they invested $100 million in Professional Fighters League, which is a competitor to UFC and the MMA circuit. Professional Fighters League's early adopters and investors were Ted Leonsis of the Washington Capitals and Wizards and Governor Glenn Youngkin. They directly benefited from this investment. Shortly after the $100 million stake was bought in PFL acquired Bellator in order to try to compete with UFC, who's the big dog on the MMA industry. Bellator was owned by Paramount Viacom, and so they've acquired that. That transaction was completed last month without any scrutiny from the Department of Justice in terms of antitrust, without any scrutiny from CFIUS for foreign investment, without any scrutiny from members of Congress. It just quietly sailed through. That could be because MMA is a relatively niche sport in the United States still. They also had their loud live PGA battle, and so they've learned from it. But they're also expanding in tennis and Formula One. They've seemed to crack that code to pick these niche sports that allow them to fly under the radar, acquire broad investments that are also owned by political elite. And so what our fear becomes is as these tentacles spread, they have better relationships with governors, with wealthy individuals in the capital, in state capitals across the country that can help spread their political agenda and not in a transparent way.
And so I have to think that the people that are in Washington are sophisticated, that there are people in the State Department that are up to speed on this, and they're not making it an issue. And so I have to surmise that they're benefiting from it. What do we know about that at this point?
In terms of government officials?
Yeah. I mean, that you're aware of what you use the term Saudi Arabia spreading its tentacles. Presumably we have a desk at the State Department that's keeping tabs on everything that regime is doing, and they're aware of this, and they're not taking the steps that they could take to prevent those tentacles from spreading. And why would the State Department not be alarmed about it?
Well, I don't know the inner workings of the State Department or who there would be looking into this. I know they are good public servants, and so I don't know. But I think Congress needs to start raising the alarm and letting the State Department know, like, hey, maybe State Department needs to start investigating these kinds of sports washing regimes beyond just Saudi Arabia, but China and Qatar and else. So
the end game, like when we started out, we talked about that the end game was that people wouldn't know that they were using tax dollars, that co-joining those with sovereign wealth funds from countries that don't observe the same human rights and freedoms that we do, and that's penetrating the country further. So if we stay on Saudi Arabia, what about female athletes in Saudi and how they're being treated and how that might relate to our country?
So there are some improvements happening around women athletes in Saudi Arabia. And I believe it was 2018, they started being allowed to go to sporting events as a family, both mom and dad and the kids. They recently opened up a women's fitness center. But to your point, Saudi Arabia does not have a history that is good on women's rights. It was only a couple of years ago that women could even drive a car. So they don't have that history. Maybe to your point, with an investment from PFL and with women fighting or women MMA taking off, there could be some development there. But for the most part, we are more concerned about what the other side of that coin looks like when it comes to Saudi Arabia's influence over American politics.
Well, if you think about the parallel, the Biden administration just gutted Title IX, which protected female athletes in this country in terms of being able to compete against other women. And, we've seen just the front end of that. Does this look like places like Saudi Arabia paving the way for administrations like the one we have today to remove the rights of women?
I don't think those are two parallel parallel points. And the other thing I would like to point out with President Biden is he actually signed the Equal Pay for Team USA Act in 2023, which gave women Olympians equal pay. This includes the women's soccer team, the women's hockey team, but also USA fencing, USA sailing. Actually, that bill is what's hanging on the wall right here.
Right. But to that point, look, if you look at the Canadian team last year, they're getting paid, but they had a man on the women's team. And so, yeah, we're going to pay them equally, but you're going to have to compete against biological men. So the money would actually seem to wouldn't the money actually seem to accelerate that?
Well, you and I probably have different opinions on trans athletes and whether they should be competing in the gender of their identity.
Well, look, in the Division III track and field, a fella just won and shattered the records for women athletes in 3 or 4 events. And look, I've been around long enough to understand what the situation was pre-Title IX, and watching the dramatic change and the opportunities for women with Title IX, and gutting Title IX is not going to lead to a good outcome. And I was just drawing the parallel that you have a situation in Saudi Arabia where female athletes are being disadvantaged, and we just introduced that into our country. And to me, it seems like an obvious parallel, but maybe it's not.
Yeah, so I wouldn't call that gutting Title IX personally, but we can.
Okay. All I would just do is encourage you to read what the policy is, and there's no other conclusion that can be reached. Where access to the playing field, access to the locker room, access to all the facilities and the money, scholarships and paychecks and things, it's just, you can't miss it. And look, even the best female athletes, Serena Williams, who I've had the opportunity to watch play, and she's not only one of the greatest athletes of this era, but potentially of all time in her sport of tennis. She is truly an amazing player. And she says she would do no better than, 200th on the men's tour, and that Andy Murray and any of the others would take her out 6-0, 6-0, 6-0. So there is a difference, and people that are actually in the arena are saying it. But our government is going in a different direction. So maybe we should move on here. Why should, at our program, oftentimes we ask people to get in touch with their members of Congress and make a request. So if you were going to get a message to our listeners, readers, and viewers and tell them, look, here's the message you need to take to your senators and your congressional reps, what would be the message you'd want them to carry?
It would be sound the alarm, write letters, send letters to the PFL, to Bellator, to PGA Live and their merger. Contact them and demand to know how involved Saudi Arabia is behind these things, what kinds of conditions they're putting, what do they want, and start just raising that awareness. We need to call for congressional hearings to investigate this kind of work. And we do know that Senator Blumenthal has been a champion of this with the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in the Senate. He's been trying. He has subpoenaed the Saudi Arabian investors, including Al Rumayyan, who's been called a central figure in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and other members of MBS's regime. They are trying, and they're being stonewalled. Other Saudi Arabian officials have threatened to imprison Saudi employees of American companies if they comply with these kinds of subpoenas. That's not okay. That needs to be, we need to let every member of Congress know that and call for these people to be pulled in front of congressional hearings.
Do you have a media arm with your organization that, some of the more widespread media might be able to pick up this story? I mean, you're in Washington Post would come to mind, any of the major, legacy broadcasters or cable channels. Are they interested in this story at all?
So we are a small operation. I am one of only a few people who works and represents the coalition. So we don't have a big, massive media arm to get all the kinds of press and everything that we need. We do talk to the Washington Post. We do talk to other reporters. And, for the most part, people are just kind of have a fait accompli. Like, this is just happening. Sports washing is a thing. We all know it sucks. There's not a whole lot we can do. And I push back on that narrative because I do think there's a lot that American sports fans can do. The whole premise of our organization was that when you organize the fan voice, you can impact change. And we have done that time and time again. You know, the idea that we just have to accept this, that sovereign wealth funds are going to be the only organizations or institutions that can afford to invest in sports teams now because they've all become multi-billion-dollar businesses.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case. I think we can push back and demand transparency and prevent some of the worst parts of this from actually coming to fruition in American politics.
Yeah, and an argument might be, look, just boycott. Don't go to the games. Don't buy the cable, the packages. Whether they're coming off cable or streaming. Don't buy tickets. Don't buy fan labeled memorabilia, et cetera, et cetera. But with tax dollars going in, let's say you're just not a sports fan at all of any sport, you're still paying for it. And what would be the message to reach people described like that to say, look, sports is fine for people that want to be in athletics, but why aren't we doing that for the symphony and the ballet and art museums and those types of things rather than funding another form of entertainment that happens to be athletics? How do you reach that group of people?
So we reached that group of people in Alexandria this past year, fighting the arena move for the Wizards and the Capitals into the city. They were concerned about even quality of life, and a lot of the people we worked with to oppose that deal were not sports fans. They just don't want their tax dollars going somewhere that doesn't invest in their community. When we're talking $1.3 billion in taxes, that's $1.3 billion that could go to schools or road construction or even little league parks and promote athletics at the youth level, which we need more of in this country. And then when you flip that coin and you look at DC, right after the deal in Alexandria fell apart, Mayor Bowser swooped in, offered Ted Leonsis $515 million over 3 years. The day after that, she cut teacher pay.
Yeah.
She cut other kinds of social services because she had a budget shortfall. I wonder where that shortfall came from.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm 100% aligned with you that the priorities are 100% misaligned. And this is coming from a person that's played just about every sport, that is a fan. And, I'm a little troubled by some of the things creeping in, but I wasn't even aware of this issue and to the level that it's gone on. And it's not trending in the right direction. So are there ways to increase transparency, and what is the appropriate role for our politicians to prevent this sports washing from going on?
When it comes to the politicians, it's going to be, letters, congressional hearings, asking these businesses, these sports franchises to explain how they're invested and who their other investors are and the ownership stakes, the foreign investments. The other place that kind of makes this more opaque is a lot of the investments are actually done through like hedge funds, such as Rise to the Rest of the Revolution Fund, which was a Glenn Youngkin and Ted Leonsis fund, where you got to go a few steps to find out that, oh, hey, look, Saudi Arabia is in this fund as well. So it's about asking those questions and demanding those answers. And then whenever these billionaires come and ask for gifts, because they love doing that, say, okay, then let's talk about your foreign investment. Divest all of your foreign investors, divest these particular foreign wealth funds, and then we can have a conversation about what subsidy you claim you need. That's where Congress can actually have the hook and fight back.
Great. Well, I think that everything you're doing makes a lot of sense. I know that people would say, well, we're going to build a stadium and that's going to be an economic boon. In 1975, I think it was, the Detroit Lions built a stadium in Pontiac, Michigan. And I'm thinking, okay, there's going to be 10 football games out there every year, and somehow that's going to revitalize the city of Pontiac. It's now been torn down, and guess what? It didn't happen. Right? But there was all of that momentum behind it. And I think people are able to see through that a little bit. City of San Diego, they were asked to, I think, put up $4 billion for the Chargers. And they looked at it and said, not worth it. And the NFL's San Diego Chargers are now the Los Angeles Chargers. So I see some pushback here. Arizona, Greater Phoenix, Arizona was just asked to invest public funds, didn't do it. And now their National Hockey League franchise is moving up to Utah. So you're seeing this, but it seems like there's always a municipality or a state that is willing to prostitute itself in order to bring that franchise in and get that stadium. Yep. And sounds to me like you're proposing, hey, go ahead and do that, but draw the line at no foreign investment in that project.
Well, no, I would never say go ahead and do that. We holistically believe publicly financed sports stadiums are a bad idea, especially because oftentimes these stadiums end up in higher ticket prices for fans, makes it harder for fans to get to. There's a whole slew of reasons why we're opposed to that. I would never say do it. But it is something that lawmakers need to start looking at and realizing, hey, there's more people getting this money than just paying off this team and their extortion scheme. There's people behind the scenes outside of American providence and outside of American jurisdiction that are going to benefit from this.
Okay. So, Brian, as we come to the end of our talk today, what didn't we cover that perhaps we should have talked about that you want to leave with our audience of the Common Bridge?
I think if anyone's going to take away anything from this, they really need to understand that Saudi Arabian sports washing, Chinese sports washing, Qatari sports washing is getting more and more prominent throughout the West. It's not just an American problem, but Saudi also has a stake in European soccer, Formula One. It's going to get worse until fans start standing up. The PFL Bellator merger that we talked about, funded basically by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, is kind of this tipping point now. It flew under the radar. No one really gave it the scrutiny it deserved. And that's going to embolden them to do it more and more and more and more. And the next thing you know, your local hometown team might be the Saudi Arabian team, might be the Chinese team. It's going to go from these niche sports to football, to basketball, to hockey, to baseball. And it's not far off. And so now is the time to call Congress and tell them, start investigating this, put a stop to this, and it's time to end sports washing in America.
I think that's a great way to wrap up this session, and perhaps we'll have you back in about a year. Let's talk about what's going on with the NCAA and how they would play into this, because you can kind of anticipate that convergence.
Oh, yeah, and especially with name, image, and likeness rights, NCAA is a hot policy area to talk about.
We've been talking today with Brian Hess. We've been covering the little-known issue around sports washing, its implications for our democracy, the responsiveness of our political class, and how it's being treated in the media. He's given some very specific examples of what people might consider doing in order to arrest this trend. And so with our guest, Brian Hess, this is your host, Rich Helppie, signing off on the Common Bridge.
Thanks for joining us on the Common Bridge. Subscribe to the Common Bridge on Substack.com or use their Substack app, where you can find more interviews, columns, videos, and nonpartisan discussions of the day. Just search for the Common Bridge. You can also find the Common Bridge on Mission Control Radio or your Radio Garden app.